Hello fellow Planeswalkers, it's Scott coming to you on the official Caffeinated Gamers YouTube channel, and today we're going to talk about the top 15 cards for Standard from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So before we get started, I want to talk about kind of how I came about the list. And first thing I want everybody to understand is the one thing about this set that I really like is that we don't have very many universal cards, meaning cards that would just go into a black deck or a red deck or a blue deck or a white deck. We have cards that would slot into specific decks. So as we talk about cards, I'll talk about kind of what deck I can see them in and where that deck then might be in Standard, given the additions from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So let's get started. So our 15th card is the Ancient One for a black and a blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a spirit god. It's an 8/8. It also has Descend 8. The Ancient One cannot attack or block unless there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. So this is a card that's specifically meant to go in our graveyard deck. And we already have a good graveyard deck in Standard. So this, in my mind, is going to slot right into that deck as another great 2-drop for it. And that deck doesn't have a problem getting cards into the graveyard. And as a result of that, by turn 3 or 4, you might even be attacking with the Ancient One. And then that's a really difficult card for your opponent to deal with. It also has, for 2 and a blue and a black mana, you get to draw a card, then discard a card. When you discard a card this way, target player mills cards equal to its mana value, and that's going to be a way to fill your graveyard as well. So you won't have a problem getting to that Descend 8. At number 14, we've got Brass's Tunnel Grinder. For 2 and a red mana, you get a legendary artifact, and when Brass's Tunnel Grinder enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards +1. So guaranteed you're going to have the Tunnel Grinder and 1 card for the 3 mana. Now, what makes this powerful and why it's in the top 15 is at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a boar counter on Brass's Tunnel Grinder. Then if there are 3 or more boar counters on it, remove those counters and transform it. And transforming it is what you really want to do. So you're going to want to get cards in the graveyard on turn 4 and turn 5, so that way you can get the backside of this, which is Cutlan the Searing Rift. It's a legendary land, it's a cave, and it gives you red mana. And whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by Cutlan the Searing Rift, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. So this is a huge value card on the backside. All you have to do is cast a permanent spell with this, and you're going to get to discover for a card of that same mana value. And that is a tremendous ability in Standard and in other formats too, potentially, because that can be legitimately turn after turn after turn. You're getting that extra card, and that's going to go right onto the battlefield, and that's really powerful in Standard. Next, at number 13, we have Wail of the Forgotten. For a blue and a black mana, you get a sorcery with Descend 8. Choose 1. If there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, as you cast this spell, choose 1 or more instead. And this is another card I feel goes into our graveyard deck, but I think it has applications beyond that as well. So if you only get to choose 1, you can either choose to return target non-land permanent card to its owner's hand, target opponent discards a card, or look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put 1 of them in your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So it actually has a self-milling ability with it as well to get to those 8. So when you play it later in the game and you use that ability, hopefully you're going to get to activate all 3 abilities. And again, this is going to go into our graveyard deck, but I think outside of that it has some Dimir or Esper playability as well. At number 12, we've got Squealing Emergence. For 1, a black and a green mana, you get a sorcery. It has Fathomless Descent. Return to the battlefield target non-land permanent card in your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So this is a another really good spell for our graveyard deck. But I think it has applications beyond that, because we're going to see cards in the graveyard in a wide variety of decks. And typically this is a 5 mana ability, but we're getting it for 3. And because this ability is tied to the number of cards in your graveyard, it makes the most sense in our graveyard deck. But I can see applications beyond that in any deck that's really has a low mana value to the cards that are in it, that are creatures or permanents that you might want to play. So I think this has applications outside of that deck as well. At number 11, we've got Bonordraas for 3 and 2 red mana. You get a dinosaur that's also a dragon. It's a 5/5. It has first strike and flying. And at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. If you exiled a land card this way, create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. If you exiled a non-land card this way, create a treasure token. So this is potentially ramp and putting a body on the field every single turn when you're exiling the top 2 cards at the beginning of your upkeep. My only concern about the card, it is 5 mana, and you're going to be potentially losing this to go for the throat and other removal spells. But if it survives on the field, then it's going to be a very powerful card in any deck that wants that additional value of getting 2 cards at every turn on top of the one you're already going to draw. And I think this easily slots into our Pia deck, and it has applications beyond that in the dinosaur deck, especially in that deck, because that deck you're probably already going to be at a relatively high mana count at this point, so you're likely to be able to play whatever you get when you exile those 2 cards. All right, coming in at number 10, we have the Restless Lands. We've got Restless Anchorage that becomes a 2/3 white and blue bird creature token with flying. We've got Restless Prairie that becomes a 3/3 green and white llama creature. We've got Restless Ridgeline that becomes our dinosaur. And then we've got Restless Reef that becomes a 4/4 black and blue shark creature with Death Touch. And then we have Restless Vent that becomes a 2/3 black and red insect creature with Menace. So all of these cards are going to see play across Standard, because any deck playing those colors is going to want at least 1 copy of them. We've seen this in the Restless cards that we got from the Wilds of Eldraine. They're all seeing play somewhere in Standard, and these will as well. And thanks for staying to this point in the video. It would really help us out to get our content to other people if you would give us a like and a subscribe to help further getting our content out. Coming in at number 9, we've got Anim Pall, Thousandth Moon. For 1 and a red and a white mana, you get a legendary human soldier. That's a 1/2, and whenever you attack with 1 or more non-golem creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anim Pall. Then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is a number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pall. So this is potentially a very busted card in the right deck. It's kind of a combination of Adeline and her ability, and Krenko Mabas and Krenko's ability to kind of generate extra goblin tokens every turn. And because of that, I think there will be a deck that almost certainly will be built around this, and it probably is an artifact deck in Boros and or Jeskai colors, and it's going to be a centerpiece to that deck, because if it stays on the battlefield more than a few turns, you're going to generate a tremendous amount of value off of it, and that value is going to put your opponent in a difficult situation pretty quickly. At number 8, we have Trumpeting Carnosaur for 4 and 2 red mana. You get a dinosaur. That's a 7/6 with trample. And when Trumpeting Carnosaur enters the battlefield, discover 5. So that's why this is coming in at number 8. You're paying 6 mana for a 7/6. So your opponent's going to have to deal with it because it has trample. But more importantly, when it enters the battlefield, you get to discover 5. This is going to be a part of our dinosaur deck. And it's possible within that deck, because of the cards that are going to be there, you're going to get a 4 cost or a 5 cost dinosaur that you're going to immediately put onto the field. And if it's the right one, it could give all of your dinosaurs haste, and then this is even more punishing to your opponent. Now, if you need some removal early in the game, you can go ahead and pay 2 and a red and discard Trumpeting Carnosaur, and it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So it's got some flexibility with it as well. And because of that, it's coming in at number 8. At number 7, we've got Here Kilim, the Deepest Growth, for 3 and 2 green mana. You get a legendary creature. That's a god. It has trample, and it's a 6/5. And whenever Here Kilim deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. You may put a creature card and or a land card from among them on the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. When Here Kilim dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control. So if your opponent cannot remove Here Kilim, then almost every turn you're going to be able to do some trample damage and get through, and that's going to lead to you getting extra lands or extra creatures onto the battlefield, and that's an incredibly powerful ability. Now, if it does die and it flips, well, you get Temple of Cultivation, it produces green mana, but then for only 3 mana and having 10 permanents on the battlefield, then you can actually just turn it back over to Here Kilim for 3 mana. And I think that's why I feel like this is going to be a green card that's going to matter in Standard, because you're going to be able to do this consistently. You hit your opponent a few times, you get that extra creature, that extra land that gets you to those 10 permanents, and then it just becomes, yes, it died, it transforms, and then you transform it back. And that's a really powerful ability. Coming in at number 6, we've got Akal Pakal, First Among Equals, for 2 and a blue mana. You legendary creature, that's a human advisor. He's a 1/5. And at the beginning of each player's end step, if an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So this is going to go into a dedicated artifact deck, and we already have some artifact decks floating around, and this, I think, pushes them to a higher level of playability, because you're going to get additional card draw every turn almost, because you're going to be playing artifacts almost every turn. And because of the flash ability on artifacts from this set, you're probably going to be able to play artifacts on your opponent's turn as well. And because of that, you're going to be getting 3 cards every turn to your opponent's 1. And that's crushing in the mid to late game when your opponent's kind of out of cards and you're generating an extra 1 or 2 cards every single turn. And that's why Akal Pakal comes in at number 6. At number 5, we've got Get Lost. It's an instant that destroys target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates 2 map tokens. This is going to be the premium white removal spell in Standard, because you're going to be able to get rid of the best thing that your opponent has on the battlefield, unless it's an artifact. And even though you're giving them 2 map tokens, that's not that big of a problem, because a lot of times you're going to be removing the creature that your opponent has on the battlefield, so they're not going to be able to use it right away anyways. And against control decks, they're almost useless when it comes to it, because they really don't have many creatures in their decks to put those +1/+1 counters on and get some value that way. So Get Lost, I think, is going to be all over Standard. At number 4, we get Thousand Moon Smithy for 2 and 2 white mana. You're going to legendary artifact, and when Thousand Moon Smithy enters the battlefield, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. So this goes really well with Anim Pall, And I can see them being both in the same deck. You cast her on turn 3, you create a token at that point, and then on turn 4 you play this, you get your gnome, and again, Anim Pall is going to attack again, creating a couple more, increasing his power and toughness. And then at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you can tap 5 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, transform Thousand Moon Smithy. And then when you do, you get Barracks of the Thousand. And I don't think getting to the 5 untapped artifacts or creatures that you're going to need to tap to get this to the backside is going to be very difficult for this card to do. And when you are on the backside, you get Barracks of the Thousand. It's a legendary artifact land, and it produces white mana. And when you cast an artifact or creature spell using mana produced by Barracks of the Thousand, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. So I can see this every single turn producing a gnome soldier artifact creature token that's just going to be growing and growing your other artifact creatures as well. And because of that, I think this is potentially the most powerful card in the set, but I'm not quite there yet with it, and that's why it's coming in at number 4. At number 3, we've got Molten Collapse for a black and a red mana. You get a sorcery and you get to choose one. If you descended this turn, you may choose both instead. So you get to destroy target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. So this is going to be our premium Rakdos removal spell, not only in standard, but it's also going to be probably going to slot into Pioneer decks and even potentially into Modern decks as a premium removal spell. And that's why it's number 3. Coming in number 2, we've got Cham the Inner Sun for 6 mana. You get a legendary artifact, and spells you control cannot be countered. And at the beginning of your end step, discover 5. And you're probably going to cast this during your second main phase and then move probably to your end step. So you're going to get that Discover 5 ability immediately. So you're getting not only this artifact, but you're going to get something else on that same turn. And then it's going to just produce tremendous value from there, because every single turn on your end step, you're going to Discover 5 and get something else out of your deck. And because of that, this potentially is the most powerful card in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And it slots into, because it's an artifact, really into almost any deck that you could think of putting it into that's going to be able to get to that 6 mana. That's going to be the one thing that prevents it from, say, going into a mono red deck. All right, at number 1, we've got Cavern of Souls. I know this is a reprint, but Cavern of Souls is a card that's played in Modern and other formats, and we are in a format right now where we have a lot of tribes that are looking for help. And as Cavern of Souls enters the battlefield, you get to choose a creature type, and then you get to add 1 mana of any color and spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. That spell can't be countered. So what Cavern of Souls does, just like Cham does, is it makes your spells uncounterable when you're tapping mana to get them. And that's going to be a very powerful ability in Standard. We've got a wide variety of spells that are designed to counter creatures, and because of that, Cavern of Souls is going to protect them. And the power of that cannot be understated in Standard, because turning off your opponent's counter spells is a very powerful ability. And that's why I have Cavern of Souls as my number 1 card from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I hope you enjoyed the top 15 list. Leave us a comment where you see these cards, or if you see something else that you think I missed from the list. We'd appreciate your comments. And again, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this, and so we can get our content out to more viewers. Thanks, and I will see you next time.